Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from the CUNY TV Foundation, Capital One Bank, Genova Burns, Gian Tomasi and Webster, New York Community Bank, the Wickoff Group, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International NYC, Cushman and Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Union Funding, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Herrick Feinstein, LLP, Hersha Hospitality Trust, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, People's United Bank, RBS Citizens Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, The Continuum Company, LLC, and These Friends.
$53 million visitors to New York City. They come here. They go to restaurants. There are New Yorkers who are here. Everybody goes to the restaurants in New York City. So today, with the assistance of my executive producer, Mr. Nieporent, we've assembled a group of individuals who are going to talk to you about the state of the restaurant market in New York. My guests today include the eminent Shelly Fireman, the chairman, founder, CEO of the Fireman Hospitality Group. Marc Forgione, the only real chef over here, a true Iron Chef who still enjoys cooking as an Iron Chef, the owner of 3 restaurants in New York City. Michael Stillman, who is the founder and president of Fourth Wall Restaurants. And last but not least, the man who will be taking over the show right now, my buddy and executive producer, who is celebrating his 20th year at Nobu and his 23rd year at Tribeca Grill, the eminent Drew Nieporent. Okay, so as Shelly was asking prior to the show what we were going to talk about, I was going to talk about how difficult it is to operate a restaurant, but Shelly said it's not a difficulty.
I really wanted to say you have some of the most successful people in this town on your show. To do the show properly, you'd have to get 4 people who are smaller in size and really struggle. And they would tell you how difficult, but you have success here.
You know, Michael was talking before. The big key is you can open up a restaurant, you can have 1 year, which is great, and then what happens, Michael?
Next year, who knows? You know, it's a very challenging,
So what's the key to, I mean, look, Maloney and Porcella, Smith and Walensky, quality meats, quality Italian, Hurricane Club, okay? What makes a successful restaurant? I mean,
you know, obviously all of us have a certain amount of consistency with what we do, and I think that's very important. But, you know, I think the initial sort of feel and look and energy of what you're doing is very, very important. You know, it's got to have a certain sort of flair and a certain sort of eye. I mean, I think that's the hardest part in some ways, you know, having that sort of initial thing that connects with everyone.
how hard is it for a chef to own and operate a restaurant?
Well, I mean, I was just about to say, kind of, when people ask me all the time, you know what I mean, what makes, how do you make a successful restaurant successful? And it's the easiest thing to do, but the hardest thing to do at the same time. I mean, if you really break it down, what is it? It's great food, great service, in a great room. sounds very easy, but it's 3 of the hardest things to do in the world, you know what I mean? And as a chef, for me, I think there's different restaurants. In a chef-driven restaurant, usually a chef-driven restaurant, the restaurant is that chef's personality. The chef owner when they own it. Like, I think when you come to Restaurant Marc Forgione, for example, you actually kind of feel like you're sitting down in my living room, whether it's from the decor to the way it looks, the way it smells, the servers, what they're wearing. I mean, the music you're listening to, it's really an extension of my personality. And but it wasn't easy. You were talking about struggling before, or Shelly was talking about you should get guys up here who have struggled. I opened, and Drew was there in Tribeca. I opened in 2009, and it was
the worst time.
I mean,
opening up a
you want to talk about struggling?
I mean, I think it was nearly as bad as a number of years ago when we were talking about struggling right after 9/11.
Yeah.
Some of the restaurants right after 9/11 in the Tribeca neighborhood,
it was worse because after 9/11, we knew that we would be supported by New Yorkers, and the minute that the streets were closed below Canal Street for 2 weeks. The minute Giuliani lifted the ban, and even pedestrian traffic, to let pedestrian traffic down, people came down. They supported us. After 9/11 was amazing. 08, 09 was a disaster. I mean, it was like
it's a very humbling experience.
But, but that relates. Shelly, you've stayed pretty much within a geographical market. Now you're trying to go to Park Avenue South. I'm not sure if you're going to get a permit. I mean, to go into that marketplace over there.
I have a passport.
Yeah, I know you have passport.
Did you ask permission, though, of Danny Meyer? That's his zone over there.
I went and I humbled myself.
Yeah, so my question is this: he never knew until he opened up Number 57, what anything past Tribeca was. Okay, right. He didn't have that, and he really, you can go to 3rd Avenue or you can go up to 57th Street, or 49. There was a region. Where do you see as the next opportunity? Because, at one time, maybe 5 years ago when we did a show and I would ask him about, who's opening up in Brooklyn, and his comment was, husband and wife, chef and wife, they wanted to make a couple of dollars. Nobody. Now Brooklyn is hip.
It's hot. It's hot.
It's hot for
But a lot of them are still husband and wife teams.
Still husbands and wives.
Doing it.
But when they get divorced, it's even harder. Okay.
But can I put forth something? When I went to Cornell Hotel School, they said success in the restaurant
Remember,
business.
you didn't do you graduated.
I got out, but I think I have the diploma. But anyway, they said success in the restaurant business was location, location, location. When I opened in Tribeca, it wasn't because I thought that was the nicest area to open in.
It was called cheap, cheap, cheap.
Right, I could afford the rent. So now you're asking Shelly where he should, put his flag down to do his next business. He's going into it's a very good neighborhood where Wildwood was. That neighborhood is very vibrant. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that in my case, in Tribeca, we needed the bees to come to the honey. In other words, the neighborhood wasn't, and you're in the same boat with me, and so you have to be that much better, Michael. You have to be so good that, and you personalize the restaurant when you put your name on the shingle there. Then people really are expecting a special, sort of an individual experience. It's not going to be like everything else.
Yeah. I mean, I think for one very big obvious reason, anything around the Freedom Tower. I mean, you're going to have 100,000 people going into work there, or something like that?
The Freedom Tower, I did a show recently with Brookfield, and we were talking about Lower Manhattan and everything. With the convergence of the shopping area and all the trains and the path, you're going to have millions of people.
That's crazy.
And it happens to be also the #1 tourist destination in the nation to go downtown over there with that.
And who's successful there today? I was there just a short while ago.
There's nobody successful.
Nobody's successful. That's the joke, or it's very desperate joke, because how are they supporting themselves? They shouldn't be there. So let's all be patient before.
But what Marc
I
is
think
saying,
it's going to be about 3-4 years. And
okay,
then,
but what's going to
start to
happen?
hum.
Because that was Stone Street. Stone Street was part of the places who opened over there. The restaurants have not done that well because people weren't staying late at night.
Mm-hmm.
They were leaving. Now, the interesting thing is to see what's going to happen with Brookfield, because they're putting a number of white tablecloth places in Brookfield Place. And that's not
doing
in the World
very
Financial
well.
Center. We're now talking moving under the road over there. Hermes has signed a lease. Some major tenants, Tiffany and others, are signed in place. But you know what? It's a separate destination. You know, when we're talking about the World Financial Center, you have all the trains. You know, there's a different market. But I agree that's a market, and you know, there hasn't been any really successful restaurants there. I mean, you know, the Palm does okay because they're across the street from Goldman Sachs. But
Shelly makes a great point about opening in a neighborhood, you know, a little too early. We're opening a new restaurant now on 26th and Park, and I think that Nomad area is really primed, but it's still going to take time to develop, and even the new hotels, and there are a great range of them coming in there, it's taking time to build it up. It needs the commercial
you know,
traffic.
it's a great story, and you bring out the Nomad area. I was at the Nomad like 3 months after they opened it up, because basically it was an SRO, and people don't know that in the hotel, 30% of the apartments are still an SRO, and they have a separate entrance and separate key over there. But that neighborhood has grown.
And, you know, it's so centralized, but still, it's going to take time. I think, you know, the commercial ground floor real estate needs to develop, you know, to have the foot traffic, and I think that's sort
But
of
you know,
fundamental.
let's look at Madison Square Park. I mean, you know, you have a couple of restaurants over there. You have a lot of people, but there's not that many people living there.
It's not a very successful area.
That's right, for
most of
restaurants.
the guys that are there.
I agree.
Unfortunately.
I think a lot of people, you know, went in too early, you know, and that's one of the challenges. That's your point, and I think it's true. It's what's next and how long is next.
You know, so what about, you know,
What we should talk about is what's tomorrow.
okay, so what's tomorrow, okay? And
If I knew, I wouldn't tell them.
no, you,
And they wouldn't
but it's
tell
gotta
me
be
if they were
Italian.
smart.
wait, it has to be.
It's got to be Italian.
But you know, let's look at it this way. You know, when Marcus was on the show, due to the host over here bringing him in, okay, you know, do you see the need for a couple more restaurants in Harlem? I mean, can a chef Marc Forgione? Is that going to capture Harlem?
It's a long cab ride for me.
I
I don't know if that's
No,
going to
no.
make it.
I just ate at the Cecil. I was actually involved in that project maybe 16 years ago.
I remember when you
before
were
its
involved.
time.
Yes.
And so Richard Parson finally actualized Min's Playhouse in the Cecil. The answer is a resounding yes, because they're doing great business. They have a very high price point. I was almost shocked at their prices. And I would predict that you're going to see a lot of good restaurants develop right in that neighborhood.
But then again, a lot of the restaurants that are up there, they've only been there a year, 2 years. You know, who's to know?
I
and
think
say?
what Michael is saying very.
I mean, I'd bet on Queens before I'd bet on Harlem. I mean, I think Queens is sort of a natural.
You know, I did.
Where in Queens? Wait a minute, I may get
I'm
a
going to
good
answer.
location.
Okay, you may get
I'm here for action.
Okay,
man.
and I'm going to bring out that point. There are approximately 14,000 apartments being built today in the Long Island City, Hunters Point, Astoria section. I did a show on what's happening in Queens. There are limited restaurants over there. So they're telling me Vernon Avenue, and they're talking, look, I can go to, how many people? I want to go to Astoria. I go to Astoria for Greek, or I
But
go
going to Queens is like going to Brooklyn, isn't it?
no,
You might as
Queens
well go
is-
to Brooklyn. It's easy to get to also. You're not
but
gonna
why not
You're
Queens?
not going to make any money unless you're running the store. But he doesn't want to cook, and I don't want to clean.
I actually have a restaurant in Queens, but it's at Citi Field.
Oh,
It only operates when
That
the Mets are
helps, yeah.
playing.
I do agree. Queens is not tomorrow. I mean, I think Midtown West,
Chinese food is good.
your backyard
West,
is
but
really.
who can afford it?
But it's still developing, and I think what you're going to see is, you know, we took Equality Italian, a second floor space. That's what you're going to see a lot of. You see it, you know, in Hong Kong, you see it in Shanghai, you're seeing it now in Paris. There are 3 new restaurants that have taken primarily second floor spaces in Midtown and are all, you know, seemingly successful.
So, you know, relating to
50
Shelley's.
Yes.
Shelley's-
No, no.
No, that's.
He's the most.
But that's
I'll tell you.
Midtown.
I'm sorry. I apologize. You go.
I don't want
The
to.
captain.
No,
no,
you
you're
know,
the
I'm just-
captain here.
I'm
What
just
am I
in-
opening?
I'm
show.
just in the.
General. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
So here's the point. Steve Ross says that the next Rockefeller Center in New York is the Hudson Yards. And fine, you know, and it's like Marc was talking about Lower Manhattan, you know, there's going to be a train, okay, one train, the number 7 train over there, and there's going to be eventually within 20 years a number of apartments and everything like that.
20 years, I think Drew and I will pass.
Okay. No. So, I mean, Clyde took over that place. What was the place? You know,
Yeah,
37th
Walt
Street?
Frazier's
Walt
restaurant. is over there.
Frazier's place, which basically is probably having no pays,
Too
no
big,
rent.
too soon, way
big.
too soon. Everyone I know who's going over there now, waiting for Hudson Yards, it's just too early.
Yeah.
It's just too early for the traffic. You know, they opened this big marketplace with a lot of interesting chefs, and I think it's going to be a challenge. There's going to be smart things over there. There's going to be a lot of traffic, but I think, you know, if you hit it too soon, it's very, very troublesome.
It's like gambling, though. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, and you know, you never know. You know what I mean? We could sit here and say that neighborhood never going to
it's a big
happen. 5
question.
years, we're back on here saying, you know what, we were
Marc,
wrong.
since we don't have, these guys aren't chefs, how does a chef make a decision to open up a restaurant?
I'm the wrong person to ask because I go by a gut feeling.
So, no, why? So,
I mean, a lot of business people will tell you you're crazy to, you know what I mean, just go with the gut. But all 3 spaces, all 4 spaces, but the 3 particular in New York, you know, I've looked at 20 spaces, but the 3 that I have today in New York, you know, it was just something in there that I looked at, you know, my business partners and says, I like it.
here's a big question. When I normally talk about Drew's, okay, not really, Drew's always had, Shelly really, and I think also Michael's, with the exception of when David Burke worked for you, you've never really had that named restaurant, named chef. People came because of the restaurant facility. People come to yours because they know it's you. They know that the quality. They knew that in your restaurants.
I think I've created a few fairly well-known chefs.
No,
over
no,
the
you
years.
have. No, but I'm talking about guys who haven't done that with chefs, okay?
I think it's a balance. I have a very talented chef partner, Craig Kaketsu, and you know he hasn't had the sort of TV fame yet, but I think it's critical that I have that partnership in terms of developing all the restaurants that have been successful. So you know, I do think, you know, whether, well, for me at least, you know, whether we're hitting that sort of stardom or fame is one thing, but to have that interrelationship with the food is still critical for me.
I think what you'll find is when a chef like Marc becomes a restaurateur chef, even he is looking for talent in the
next
back
big
of the
chef,
house.
yeah, for
He's
sure.
looking.
I'm in the process of.
In other words, he's
doing
not
it.
going to tell the guy. He might have a crew that will actuate his food, but if he gets somebody who's very creative and talented, he's not going to snuff the guy out by just telling him do it this way.
No, I
no
mean,
other
right
way.
now, my chef at Restaurant Marc Forgione, I mean, we collaborate on a daily basis. We sit down for a half hour every morning and we talk about.
But the benefit
what
of a chef being a restaurateur is that they should know great food. Now you're fortunate because you have Shelly Fireman, who's world traveled. And there's nobody who knows food like Shelly. So as a restaurateur, you can't put one by him either.
Right, but he's
the chef.
learned this over the years, and you know he started. I remember when he opened up his, you know, Fiorello. You know, he went to the library and he read about the Italian sauces, and right, that's how you did it originally.
No, I went out and ate a half a dozen pastas an evening.
Okay, so you.
A human garbage pail.
That brings up a good point, though. I think that when a chef wants to become a restaurateur, you need to get out of the kitchen and understand that the kitchen isn't the end-all, be-all of the restaurant. You can make I'm sure you guys can agree with me, you can make the best food in the world. If your restaurant isn't a great place to be, you're going to be serving the greatest food in the world to nobody.
But you also need, and we discussed this, we joked about this a number of times, you also need a personality, either of the chef, a personality of the owner, or the maitre d', or you need that ambiance that people want to feel comfortable.
What am I doing here then? Where am I? Get
Thank
me
God.
out of here.
No, actually,
My
Shelly
ass out of here.
is one of the most perseverant people I've maybe the most I've ever seen in the restaurant business, because he, you know, there's that expression, resting on your laurels. He has changed the decor, the graphics, the lighting, the uniforms, the chefs, more times in a single premise. I mean, if anybody did a documentary on like one of Shelly's installations and the way it evolved, you know, we only have 10 years in most of our leases. In his case, you know, in that 10 years, he might have changed it at
No,
least.
you have to remember, Shelly also has the other question.
Which is?
He likes signing 40-year leases. You know, he doesn't, 10-year leases, nothing. You know,
I
he
don't
likes
have to
giving.
key them. That's why I don't mind signing
You know,
them.
but you like the long-term lease.
Yeah,
And
I
you know
sure
what?
do.
And you know what's?
I hate to
It's
go to
really
work.
interesting when you look at the situation that you sign a 10-year or 15-year lease.
You gotta be
that goes,
crazy.
That goes by very fast.
So
and
true.
then, and you
That's
know, you
really
look
true.
at this.
If you
and-
do it, you're
and-
crazy.
But nobody gives you anything more than that. Maybe you. We don't get more than that. Maybe you.
I don't believe.
I know he
I
did
don't
it, the
think
quality.
anybody
You
You
here.
just got to build it big enough.
Well, that goes back to your original question too about how do you sustain and how do you have a success?
You don't
Usually,
take
once you
a
start figuring it
10-year
out and making the money, your lease is up.
Can I tell you something?
So it's not easy.
Montrachet I opened in 1985, so this year would have been 29 years. I've paid rent there, and a very reasonable rent. I have a terrific landlord there. But if you add it up, I've paid in excess of $3 million in rent, and that's cheap. And the
cheap.
building was sold for $150,000. We bought it, when nobody was in Tribeca. So if you really put it into terms, Tribeca Grill, which was a restaurant
That you
that I
bought the-
opened with a little known actor named Robert De Niro. That's now 23 years we actually own
You
that
own
premise.
the
and then
property.
that's been such a
Right, and you
smart
own your
move.
property on 47th Street. Huh?
We own the property at Smith-Walensky, and it's a tremendous move. We look for those kind of opportunities now, but it's harder and harder. It's harder to find those sort of one-off opportunities.
You know, it's
particularly in New York.
interesting. If you go to Flushing, which I don't think any of you are going to open up a restaurant in downtown Flushing, all of the retail is owned as condominiums because of the Asian concept that most of the places of the ownership, they all want to own it. So you'll see that little Chinese restaurant or whatever it is, they own it. They bought that condominium. They want that. It was that piece of the ownership of the land that they like.
Which you can't buy in Manhattan.
You can't do it.
Can't do it. Not today.
And
You could do it in Paris, but you can't do it here.
evenings, we were talking about this, daytime you may have New Yorkers. How much of your business today would you say are visitors of the 53 million today
Glad you
in
call
the
them.
evening?
Glad you call them visitors and not tourists, because we used to call them tourists, and it was like a bad thing, and now we call them
No,
visitors.
no, visitors.
And we love
so,
them.
so what? How would you say at your restaurants at night?
A big number, probably a third. It's a very important thing. Most of our restaurants are in Midtown, and, it's a huge part of what we do.
Mark?
I mean, it changes big time on the weekends. Friday night, Saturday night, I think that number goes up. But if I was to, to put a number on it, I would say it's got to be same thing, probably about
Now,
35%, 40%.
You show?
God bless them. That's
I got
No, but do you remember our era 20 years ago? It was frowned upon. They would literally say, "Oh, that's a tourist joint," right? So now we don't use the word tourist anymore. We use the word visitor, and we love them.
we love them, baby.
How many
God bless
people
them.
would you say come to your restaurants or other Iron Chefs because of of your reputation and what quality?
I mean, a percentage, I'm not sure, but I tell people all the time, and not for so much the visitors. The visitors are obviously a one-time, thank you very much, and I would say that number is very high. But New Yorkers, you can't fool a New Yorker just because you're on TV. And a lot of my regular customers came there because they had heard about me, whether it would be through the magazines or TV or this, that, the other thing. But now they've become regular customers. And that's not because I'm on TV. It's because they actually enjoy coming to the restaurant. So you can get them there once, but you're not going to get them back.
Elvis Duran loves you.
He does.
Now, we were talking, we got to Queens, but we haven't got to Brooklyn. Brooklyn is growing. Brooklyn has 2.7 million people living there, not visitors. And people really want to be in Brooklyn. There's an enormous amount of business on Flatbush Avenue. I mean, I did a show recently on that across the street from the Barclays Center. I still have mixed emotions about it, but I understand that 2 or 3 major New York City restaurant owners are moving down there. Have you thought of that marketplace?
No, I mean, I honestly, I mean, I never say never, obviously.
No, I'm talking now. I'm not.
But I mean, I love where I am in Tribeca, and
We're looking.
And I mean, Brooklyn's like the cool
It is cool.
car that you
I'm
want to get
actually-
in. You know what I mean?
When I leave this studio, I'm going to the Barclays Center tonight to see the Nets play. That River Cafe, which had been closed due to Sandy, is just reopened as of last Saturday.
Right.
And everyone who's watching should really go back to the River Cafe, one of the great restaurants. You've had Buzzy on your
Right.
show.
Buzzy's play. He's a great.
Yeah,
guy.
and he's great. And then, but Brooklyn, and I just ate there on Saturday at Buttermilk Channel, very nice restaurant there. And there's just a sort of,
Why don't you do the Wednesday reviews in the Times? Because it sounds like that you've been eating everywhere.
Drew, can you please do the Wednesday?
That would be fantastic. But
I'll
no,
tell you what, the last review, though, was very interesting because he actually upgraded a restaurant that's been in business for a long time.
Good. Great for her,
which
great
is
chef.
almost
Okay.
unbelievable.
Now I'm going to ask you the big question, okay? And it's not relating to any of you. There are restaurants that have been around many, many, many years. How do they, will they die? Will some of these old line, I'm not talking about Peter Luger, I'm talking about other ones that have been around and they just,
For instance, who?
for instance, the Palm. For instance, Patsy's Italian Restaurant. Okay, for instance, places.
I think it depends if they reimagine themselves. You know, I've seen places like Keen's, it's over 100 years old, and they've reimagined themselves in the last 10 years, and they're doing better than ever, and they're a competitor. But I think, you know, there's always a possibility. Smith Walensky's 38 years, and we're still constantly trying to be classic, but to sort of reinvent in small ways.
Now
That's
it,
the
now
key.
it relates 38 years in the steak business. That's the main thing.
Longer than I've been around.
Okay, you're in the steak business.
I am.
How is it today? And you see all these new steak places, and Drew was talking about the New York Yankee steak place. Can the city absorb more and more steak places?
I mean,
No.
I hope so.
Isn't that it?
people love beef.
I hope
mean,
that these guys
honestly,
do.
I've never, you know, I've never seen, you know, people just love to eat a good steak, you know, and especially in New York, you know, I think New York is known for their steakhouses, and it's a very competitive
I mean,
market.
look,
I'm in the steakhouse business too, you know. We have Prime Steaks has a big sign at the Red High, and I say no.
I know, but you're selfish.
And no, I say that these guys, we're successful, but you asked the question, is there more opportunity?
I mean, look,
say no.
I
I
think a
gonna
bad
have to
steakhouse
reinvent.
won't make it just
You-
because they're serving bad
now,
steak.
you know,
You need to be
if you
serving a
look,
good
you know,
steak in New York.
I
I don't
remember
know what a good steak
you
is,
know,
though. Everybody has a good steak.
I mean,
you know,
Wolfgang's
otherwise
is
we-
in business, what, 7, 8, 10 years? And they're growing, they're constantly opening up additional places.
I
I'm
think
gonna-
people like that are going to be in trouble.
Ooh, I'm sorry.
You know, in
which
the
one?
long run, maybe not all the locations, but I think that steakhouses are going to have to develop and refine what they're doing. It's got to be interesting. It's got to be more involved.
But I
the
think what you said
classic
before is
look-
something which Drew has always done his entire career. You have to reinvent. You have to fix it. Okay, I'm not saying fix it.
But Michael, the proof is in the pudding. For instance, Smith and Walensky's had to upgrade their wine list because the marketplace became more competitive in the way of wine.
Absolutely.
Chefs, John George Vongericht and all these chefs, Laurent
Laurent Tourandel, who I worked with.
Marc Forgione, everyone got into the steakhouse. Guess what? They elevated the quality of these things. That's why they're popular. And also, it's a lot easier for the customer. When they say they're going to a steakhouse, guess what? They know what they're going to eat.
No question. 30 minutes with you guys is never enough. So
All right, we're gonna
needless.
stay then.
Well, okay.
Five and a half
Now,
hours.
with the exception of you, because you don't want to come back.
I gotta get to work.
Okay, we're all going to invite everybody back in a couple of months, but you are always invited back.
Thank you
So I'd
very
like to
much.
I'd like to thank Shelly,
Thank you.
Marc, Michael, and of course Drew, and I'll see you next week.